Welcome, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kalaya Ann Domingo, and I'm a staff member with Communities of Opportunity. We're really excited to have you here. Thank you for joining us on this hot August day during your lunchtime. Really appreciate all of you joining us. And this session will be recorded if you want to share it with other folks who weren't able to be with us today. Communities of Opportunity is a joint initiative between King County and the Seattle Foundation. We work to support community-driven policy and systems change to address the inequities that we see in our communities at the intersections of community connections, health, housing, and economic opportunities. Our speaker series is part of our learning community strategy, where we aim to really uplift the solutions, the strategies, the work that's happening in our communities. And we also provide opportunities to build relationships across different communities and geographies, and really strengthen capacities and skills, all in the purpose of changing the structures and systems that contribute to the inequities that we live in. Today, I'm really excited to hear from youth in our communities around ways in which they are working. Go ahead and let's switch to the next slide. So our virtual event today is brought to you by La Roxay Productions in connection with BDS. And really, I'm going to have Roxana introduce herself and the work that she's done in order to curate this series as well as our event today. Before we get started, I would like to have us start with a land acknowledgement. You can go ahead and move to the next slide. Thank you. And also behind the scenes, we have our team from Cascadia Consulting helping with us today, Alyssa Rodriguez. So if you have any questions or challenges, please feel free to message one of the hosts. Today, we also are using the webinar format. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and use the Q&A button and submit a question, and we'll have some time for those questions after our panel. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that today, many of us, I don't know that all of you, but I and many of our other presenters, and actually I think Roxana is in a different geography, but many of us are on the homelands of the first people of the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Snoqualmie, and Stillaguamish, Suquamish, and Tulalip tribes. We raise our hands to honor all the descendants of the Coast Salish people. We thank them for their hospitality as the first people of this land and for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. We honor the immense, immeasurable, and often unrecognized contributions and sacrifices of the Coast Salish and Indigenous people. And we acknowledge the ongoing disparities, racism, and political invisibility experienced by the Coast Salish and Indigenous people of this land. I want to thank the Sun Collaborative, Seattle Urban Native nonprofits for sharing their land acknowledgement with us and giving us permission to use this today. They are also one of our COO partners. So we're going to just go ahead and jump in and get started. I'm going to pass this over to Roxana and take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Kai, and thanks to everybody who's tuning in today on our panel. I am very, very enthused to be moderating this panel today. We had a pre-event check-in last week with our youth, and I'm very excited for this conversation today. So my name is Roxana Pardo Garcia. I'm the cultural worker and certified chingona at La Roxay Productions, and who alongside Juan Manuel Flores and Ismael Nunez of BDS Planning have been curating the speaker series. So thank you all so much for being here for the third part of 5 events. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists to get today started. So Athena is 18 years old and has been involved with Young Women Empowered since she was 13, but she has been a youth activist since she was just 9 years old. She got started in the climate movement back in 4th grade and has participated in many actions, such as lawsuits against the Washington state government, marches, rallies, and other campaigns. She's been taking a bit of a break from that work since 2020, however, to focus on bettering herself as a person and figuring out the best way to lead her community as a young person. Currently, she works as a challenge course facilitator at Cap Long and is extremely passionate about the YWE community and helping its members grow alongside her. Welcome, Athena. Ash is 18 years old and has been involved in Young Women Empowered for 2 years. As she's very adamant on exploring the variety of YWE programs, she's taken a deep commitment to Why We Grow and the Youth Leadership Council. Through her time at Why We, she has developed a deep understanding of the importance of food sovereignty by completing 2 internships at Why We Grow and being part of 3 volunteer programs at Mara Farm. In addition to Youth Leadership Council and other workshops, have helped her find her voice and passion in community. In her free time, she enjoys playing volleyball, reading, and spending quality time with friends and family. She will be a freshman at the University of Washington this upcoming fall. She's excited to utilize her skills and passions she obtained during Why We in and out of the classroom. Welcome, Ash. And we have Mary Hall Williams, who is the Events and Programs Coordinator at Why We. Mary is a student at the University of Washington Department of Anthropology. She brings a love of and passion for community healing and health and healing, social justice, spirituality, belonging, and sustainability. No stranger to public speaking or activism, she has worked in her community as a youth leader on sustainability and gardening efforts and unhoused outreach, and as an advocate for domestic worker rights. Most recently, she is one half of the dynamic duo that created Blackout Healing to better serve the Black community of Seattle by offering life-affirming events in a time when the hypervisibility, viral Black death, and racial uprising has permeated the minds and hearts of Black people everywhere. In all endeavors, Mary brings a passion for people, service, and a strong inclination for experiential learning. Welcome, Mary. All right, y'all. Alyssa, if you want to remove the slides, and Ash, if you want to turn on your camera. Welcome, y'all. So incredibly excited to have you 3 here. Before we get started on the panel, I wanted to just hand the mic over to you all. If there's anything else that you want to add to your bios or anything else that you want to share with today's audience. Athena, if you want to share, and then pass it over to Ash and then Mary.
Hi, everybody. I don't think I have anything to add that wasn't in my bio, but I'm very happy to be here.
Hey all, same as Athena, I have nothing to add, but I'm super excited to talk today and meet everyone on the panel.
I'm also okay with my with my bio for the moment.
All right, awesome. So today we're going to be talking about how do we create a culture for young people to lead. And we have a couple of questions that we're going to kick off, particularly with Athena and Ash, and then we're going to end the close out our session with some questions for Mary as the adults on the panel, and then we're going to leave another question for our young people. Again, for those in the audience, if you have questions that you have for our panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will be answering those towards the end of today's event. So Athena and Ash, let's get started. So understanding that we all start in different places, we're all coming from different places, and we're all in different parts of our journey. Can you share with us about your journey in this work, your process as young people, and have you always been who you are today? And what are the things that have influenced you and guided and supported you along the way? So whoever wants to kick it off, Athena or Ash?
I can go ahead and kick it off. Great question. For that one, I'd say for me personally, like growing up, I was kind of just like, I did sports, hang out with my friends. Like I like to do art and stuff. I wasn't really in the like being like a leader type like organizations, but I'd say it just happened like randomly when I was with my friend one day hanging out, and she was actually a part of Why We, and I went with her, and I was just talking to the adults there, and they were all like really nice, and they were like, hey, you should join this program. And so I decided to take this up and join the program, and it started off just like doing like week-long programs. Maybe I went to like a day event, and then I decided like, hey, this is something I want to do, and I joined the Mara Farm program. I really loved it, and I just continued to do it. It was a space where I felt welcomed, and I felt like I was actually creating change in my community that, I live in every day. So that's kind of how I started. And this was actually about 2 years ago when I started my journey with Why We and also food justice.
Thanks, Ash.
Okay. Well, my journey's kind of a long one. I started doing youth activism and leadership work in my community when I was I want to say 8 years old in 4th grade. So this is around 2014. I got involved initially with a group that was called at the time Plant for the Planet Seattle. It was like a youth group created by children elementary school aged with the goal of planting a bunch of trees around the world in combating the climate crisis. So that's really been the focus of a lot of my activism work, has been climate related. So in 4th grade, my understanding of the situation was, I think, pretty simplistic. To me back then, it was like a matter of, my understanding was kind of like, the adults aren't doing enough, so the kids are going to step up and pick up the slack. And I wasn't very confident back then. I didn't know what I was talking about. I knew very simple versions of science and everything else. And it's honestly had a lot of ups and downs in the journey. Like, I had a lot of failures. I have this very vivid memory of being like 5th grade. I'm like 10, and I gave my first speech at like a climate event. And I remember like writing this whole speech that I thought was really good. And I sat down with one of my mentors and we like edited it, and my paper was a mess. And I went up on the stage and I started giving my speech, and I realized like halfway through that it like sucked. So I was sitting there like hands shaking, staring down at the paper. I didn't make eye contact a single time. And then I got back down and I went and talked to my mentor about it. And I was like, did I do okay? And he was like, would you have asked me that if you actually thought you did well? So that's kind of where I started. But I've come a pretty long way, both in terms of like my ability to speak to people and also just my stance. Like, I've realized that there's a lot of nuance that I wasn't really thinking about when I was in elementary school, just in terms of like everything it takes to get a movement going, and also like the extent of work that needs to be done. I think back then I was extremely individualistic in my thinking. I thought that like the way I was framing it in my brain was like, me and my friends are going to save the world, but it's not really like that in the real world. I think that like substantial impacts are usually done by like a large community of people, and that is the only way to get things done. So like I said in my bio, I've been taking a break for a while, but I definitely have not always had the understanding or even like mindfulness, I guess, that I have now, just about the extent of like things in the world that youth leadership is needed on. Yeah.
Thank you both for sharing. Yes, I think we're going to get more into this conversation around how it takes a community to really transform the world. But first, Athena, is that a parrot on your shoulder? I just wanted to confirm.
Yes, it
I was
is. This is
saying-
Tristan. Let me see if I can get a good camera angle on
There we
her.
go.
She's
Okay.
a kike. She's hanging out. She might get kind of noisy later. I'll try to mute if she starts screaming.
Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge all, everybody that is here with us today. So thank you so much. That's so awesome.
Yeah, she gets very excited when I'm on video calls like this. So if she starts singing, I'll try to mute because she can be kind of loud. But just as a heads up, if you're wearing headphones.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll move on to our next question. So I want to preface this question with saying that you two, Athena and Ash, when we had our pre-event check-in, that you both really transformed and reframed this conversation for Manny and I. And I feel like this question was, when we were talking about it and where this question came from, was really from that reframing. Because I think that our event description actually says like, how do we step aside, as adults? And you are like, no. So the question for you all is, what role do you think adults should play in youth work? And can you share some things that may or may not have worked for you in relationship to the adult in your lives and the dynamic between adults and young people and the collective work that we are all doing? Whoever wants to start.
This
I
is
can
a
jump.
super
Oh,
good question. Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, do you want to go first? I'm like, I need to think somewhere.
it's okay. I've actually thought about a lot about this one, so I can just go ahead and talk. Um, my so because I've been in climate activism for so long, I've had like a lot of different mentors, like people who were more hands off, people who were more hands on, and I've like had a lot of time to introspect about like the different kinds of leadership and mentorship that I received from adults. Um, and my stance is that I do not, how do I put this in like really eloquent way? I feel that like the framing by movements often of like children taking charge and the adults like stepping aside is honestly like a lot of pressure and weight to put on the shoulders of a young person, because what I experienced when I was younger and getting involved in climate activism was like a lot of responsibility that I felt like a lot of people sort of expecting me to be the one who stepped up and, oh, there she is, who stepped up and like was the one who like saved the world, you know. It, and that was like a lot for me to get during my formative years. It transformed into kind of a lot of guilt. Like whenever I wasn't doing climate activism, I was like, well, am I now actively letting the world be destroyed? So my opinion on what good like adult mentorship looks like is, well, obviously it's going to vary and it's hard for me to say like what the best ideal is, but I feel like what I want from adults is guidance without being patronizing. I don't want like to be told what to do or coached, but I do want, because I feel like adults have so much wisdom and nuance and understanding of topics and knowledge, and I want that information to help like supplement my own work in a way that isn't like putting the weight on my shoulders. Like I want it to be a collaboration, not necessarily like adults acting as like the standbys to help the kids, but just the kids movement. You know, I want adults who are committed to helping on their own time and also like guiding us, if that makes sense. Like I feel like I'm not trying to have a speech written for me and then go and be the mouthpiece. But what I always felt was like a lot for me as a kid was like that framing of like, you're the leader and your insight and perspectives and your ideas are going to be the ones that fix the world, because I didn't know crap at that age. You know, I didn't know how to fix the problems that we were facing. And maybe I had a couple good ideas, but they lacked understanding. So in a lot of ways for me, that failure was like in that framing of like, you're going to be the one to take charge and lead us out of it, when that feels like it's not really my job. So yeah, it's complicated. There's like, I want more commitment and accountability from adult mentors is how I would say it. But certainly not in a way that's like patronizing or talking down to kids. I think that is also a big thing that like especially young teenagers really just cannot stand. So a way of guiding that understands like the different levels of life experience between the two groups without like being too intense about it.
Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I definitely want to second everything that Athena just said because I agree with it all. I think that for adults, I think that I agree. Like they shouldn't like step down and be like, okay, take control, but like play the role of like working beside us youth and providing us with like opportunities and resources to become effective leaders for like the future and for our current generation. Because I do think, like Athena said, like adults do have a lot of wisdom and also like they're older than us. They have a lot of experience with, you know, whatever it is, whether it's climate justice, food justice, anything. So they have some knowledge that we don't know. So I think adding the two, like some youth know things and know how to say things to, you know, people now that will get them in a movement that adults might not know how to say. So I think just like working together, but also adults, like again, providing us with the opportunities to grow in like whatever we want to do. And I think giving advice also is a really good one and allowing us to dip our feet in the water with like
a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit there, and then we can decide what we really want to put our effort into. And then while we do that, they're like, okay, now this is what you can do. And also allowing us to make mistakes. I think that's a big thing for me. I think some adults, like Athena said, they tell you, don't do this, don't do this, do this, do that. And it's kind of controlling. And I don't think that's the best way to do things. I think allowing us to make mistakes and then having us reflect on them, like, okay, what do you think that you could have done better? And then being like, okay, this is what I think that you could do better for next time. So really just working beside us to help us grow into our best selves, I think is like the most effective way of like mentorships from adults. In this generation.
I'm going to kick it over to Mary for this question as the adult that works with young people. Any perspective that you have regarding this particular question?
I think Asha and Athena are really spot on. I guess another translation of that is recognizing that we live in a patriarchal society that creates this notion of dominion over kids and young people in general. And so I think when you think of like the condescension or not assuming competence, and we also see that play out specifically in BIPOC communities and communities where there's a lot of neurodivergence, there's this hierarchy that is kind of passed on and societally created. And at YB, what we do is we build relationships, and relationships are mutual commitments. So I'm showing up in this way and I'm trusting you to meet me in relationship. And so I guess what's coming up for me is that a mentor invites a young person to relationship and they build the relationship first. So like, I don't know, I was young, I was a youth pastor at 16, and I had a lot of experiences of people like telling me about myself when we had no relationship, right? They're coming in hot. They're like, this is what you need to be doing. This is your problem. And it's like, no, the first thing you need to do with young people is get to know them and build a relationship. This is before you start telling your life story. Or some people are really into like, I went through this and I want to help youth by telling all my trauma. Like, no, you are building a relationship with a young person. And that is the starting point to any mentorship before you can expect them to be receptive. And really, it's not, I think it's really becoming aware and conscious of the ways that we've been socialized into thinking that we have dominion and power over young people. Because the truth is that, like, you're not talking to any other adult like that and expecting them to be like, wow, you've changed my life, thank you. Like, they're like, who are you? Do we know each other? And so taking that attitude and intention and awareness and being willing to check yourself when you feel those tendencies of like, I know better, coming up with young people and really getting to know them before you jump in with whatever it may be. Trust building.
Great. I think we may have lost Ash, but hopefully they can reconnect back soon. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the accountability piece, because I heard Athena and Ash say this in our pre-meeting, and you all alluded to it in your answers, that as adults, that there needs to be accountability and commitment from adults. And I also heard you all say in our pre-check meeting that like adults cannot absolve themselves from the responsibility they have from the things that they have created, from the things that we have created, right? And so my question to you all is, how do we support your leadership, youth leadership, without forcing you all to carry the burden of something that you did not create? Because a lot of what we are asked, you know, when we hear things like youth are the future or youth have the answer, we're usually saying that in relationship to something that was not created by you or your generation. So, so the question again is, how do we support your leadership without forcing you to carry the burden of something that you did not create? So Athena, I'm gonna go to you just because I haven't seen Ashley connect yet.
Sure. So a lot of it to me, like the victories of my activism was when I felt like I was being treated as an equal. And I mean that both in the sense of not being condescended to and also not being idolized. I don't know how many people have heard, this is actually, that sounds really pretentious. I'm sure everyone here has heard of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish climate activist who started the Fridays for Future movement. She striked every Friday from school, and she was kind of like, for a year, she was kind of like lauded as like this youth hero, and who was super incredible and inspiring and amazing, and people were like quoting her speeches all over the place. And yeah, she was inspiring. She had a way with words. She was committed to solving the crisis, and that in itself is admirable. But to me, as like a youth activist who'd been in it for years, I was seeing Greta and I was thinking, like, this poor girl, because the sacrifice that she made for the climate crisis, and then like missing so much school when it was something that she wanted to be doing, and then like to be treated like some kind of hero when she was saying over and over again, like, stop looking at me, stop thinking about me, think about the climate crisis, look at the science, stop thinking about my speeches, just look at the facts and take action. And then people were like, Greta's so inspiring, I loved her recent speech, saying stuff like, we don't want your hope or whatever, over and over again, and like refusing to like actually hear the words she was saying. So to me, being treated like an equal means not being put on a pedestal, because that's pressure, but being talked to like face to face. We are allies. We are in this together. We are taking this one step at a time. We are strategizing. We are working together on this. So a lot of it is like reframing that argument, I think. I mean, not argument, reframing that messaging. I think like stepping in it together, like side by side, and working together on the crisis. In general, any situations like racial inequity or food insecurity, or like from my experience, the climate crisis, just like not putting youth up like on a plate and being like, these are the heroes, these guys are going to save us, because in reality we shouldn't be saying specific names, we should be a collective. And to me, having people be like, you're so inspiring, you're the reason that we're going to get through this, was always like an extra reason why I just could not take a break.
Thanks, Athena. And I see that Ash is back. So Ash, the question that Athena was answering is, because we all talked about accountability that adults have, right? Accountability that we have to not just give you all the work, right? That we actually have some ownership in that as well. So how do we support youth leadership without forcing young people to carry the burden of something that they did not create? And if it helps to have your camera off so your phone doesn't overheat, feel free to just unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. Phone totally overheated. I had to fan it off. But thank you for welcoming me back. Okay, sorry, I'm like rereading the question again. Wow, that's a good question. I think for this one, it's kind of just like, I feel like it's really simple, but like, unfortunately it happens. I just think that just like knowing that it's a collective thing to like make positive change in the world. Like, it's not anyone's fault or like anyone's job to do all the work, and like acknowledging that and accepting that. And yeah, like, I don't know. I don't even know why there's like this thing where it's like people now think that youth like need to do it because like we're the rising generation, but it's just a collective thing. Like, things that happened decades ago are still in effect now. So I think also acknowledging that can help to like avoid this situation. Like, we're not the only ones that experience this, adults experience this as well. And just knowing that within yourself, I think that's just the best way, just not doing it. Yeah.
Thanks, Ash. Mary, anything you want to add to this particular question?
Collaborative, community-based models for change are my thoughts. I'm thinking of like when someone is a visionary, like creating spaces for young people to be visionary about the future. Great, this is needed. But usually there's a visionary And then there are all the people who are doing the work and who are pushing the doors open so that the visionary can walk through, and who are dealing with the bureaucracy, and who are working in all of these different environments. And so when I'm thinking the language of collaboration, like we're collaborating with young people, we're propping up their vision, but we're not abandoning them to carry the whole weight. And I guess, yeah, I think that's the main thing that's coming up for me. And being someone who, I love my job, but I do work in the nonprofit and industrial complex. And there's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of stuff that is constantly happening. And so I think part of like being the adult is getting in front and pushing and working and doing the emails and playing a role in those processes that the young person doesn't have to do. And I also think like these bureaucratic environments or like nonprofits, the amount of facade and lying that happens within them are where visions sometimes go to die. Like we hype kids up and we tell them they can make change, and then we send them into systems that are not prepared to receive them or their leadership. And so I'm like, how can we go and fight those battles so that young people can be in their positive imagination for the future and really be in their leadership without constantly being smacked by all the crap that is involved in like the policies and processes of making change. But really, I'm thinking like, it's collaboration. We are collaborating, we are building relationship, and we're creating spaces for young people to be visionary without having to deal with or carry as much of the stuff that comes with that.
What you just said like triggered my like youth traumas of like sending young people into systems that are not prepared to receive them. I think a lot of us adults in the room probably have some memory or some experience where we were sent off into spaces that were not ready for us, and the damage and that hurt and the like, all the things that caused within us. So thank you so much for saying that, because I think that a lot of us who are in this work now, potentially resonate with what you said. That yeah. And yes, Kai, to what Kai, yeah, where visions go to die. And we don't want that. We don't want our young people's visions to go to die. So our next question is actually about that, about your visions and imaginations as young people. So Athena and Ash, like, how can we, as a society, as adults, as people, as professionals, as community members, support with centering joy in youth work? It's not just about crisis, and trauma and pain, but it's also about the joys that you all get to experience. So what has this looked like for you, or what do you want this to look like for your joy to be centered in the work that we're all collectively? And I'm seeing y'all think, so take some time to think, no pressure to just jump in.
If I may jump in, Ash and Athena, do I have your permission to? Yeah, okay. One thing that's coming to mind for me is modeling joy, right? And I think assuming that people in the audience are doing youth work or some kind of advocacy or policy work or grants or whatever it is around youth work, I feel like most of the time what we're modeling is overwork, borderline burnout, exhaustion, like all of these other things that are not really centered in joy. We're modeling grinding, we're modeling anxiety and stress. And it's like, what does it mean to model and intentionally claim joy in youth work in a way where it's creating a culture that enables young people to step more fully into this? What does it mean to incorporate play into every aspect of what you're doing, to like break the ice and allow for silliness? And we do a lot of that at YB. It's super uncomfortable. Ripping up of cool cards and like pterodactyl sounds and like all of this slightly uncomfortable, especially to newbies at YWE activities, but it's really about like, how do we play together and how do we claim that as part of the work? And then for adults, how do we model being uncool enough to participate at dramatic levels that allow young people to embody the fullness of who they are?
I'm really glad you said that and went first because I got my mind like going now. I really agree with what Mary said about like being the model for that joyous work, because I think when it's just like super like, oh, grind hard, work hard, you know, no breaks, all gas, like no breaks, it's kind of like, it kind of makes you like shy away, or not shy away, but just not be as ready to, or like determined to go into like work that's needed in this like society and world, because it's like you think that you're not going to have any fun and you're going to constantly be worried and stressed out. And like, I don't mean like I just can't live with just stress and that's it. Like I need some fun, I need some laughter. So I think like one thing that YB does that I really like is like hikes, which I only went on one hike with Mary, but it was so fun and it was so good. And I just like really enjoyed it. Like I want to go hiking now. Again, another weekend, and like painting sessions, karaoke, like just little playful things like that that really like highlight your day when you're dealing with work that's like really like traumatic for a lot of people in the community. So there is joy in the work, and we just have to create that space for one another so that people continue to want to do it and are also able to do it mentally and physically for themselves.
Yeah, I want to second everything those two said, because why we is one of the most positive spaces. I think it is the most positive space I've ever been in. And a lot of it is because of that culture of like radical self-love and joy. Like it opens a space for especially queer BIPOC youth to, you know, have fun and just like enjoy themselves and love themselves and love, like who they are. And that for me is like a huge important part in youth work and in youth activism, because I think that a lot of people would agree that loving yourself as somebody who's not like a cishet white person in the 21st century is an act, like that is a radical act, that is an act of activism, because in the world that we live in, that is defiance. That is like saying, actually, I deserve to take up space and I deserve to be happy. So like opening that door and like sort of making space for joy and for fun and just for like self-care, I think is one of the big things that has made my experience at YWE just like constantly positive and healing. So my climate group has been trying to restructure the way that they operate, trying to make things healthier and easier on the youth after all our previous youth activists burned out and stopped doing it. And one thing that they're really working on right now is going out in nature once a month and just doing something fun and healing. Last month we had a low tide beach hike. It was very fun, and we spent a lot of time that day talking about the ocean and how to restructure and how to reform in a way that doesn't let the same mistakes be made again. And that to me is like one of the most valuable parts, because like I said earlier, it's not going to be individuals who are fixing any of the problems in the world, it's going to be a collective. And so community building is one of the most powerful things that we can do. And in order to build community, you need to have joy and shared experiences and love. So
Thank you all so much for sharing that. And just to advocate for what you all shared, people need to fund joy. They need to fund the things that create joy, or that, you know, your karaoke nights or your hikes or your overnight trips, like all of these things require resources. And so as we are thinking about budgets and kind of where resources go into organizations, I just really want to advocate for what you all are talking about. because I think that's so incredibly important. Taking young people on a hike is probably the funnest thing you can do. I've taken groups of youth on hikes and they are a blast. They are some of the just letting young people be young people, you know, and get to experience that. So thank you so much for sharing. I want to ask this question because I've heard you all say it multiple times, like that. Athena, you explicitly said it where like you were like, I was very individualistic, and then I've realized that there's actually like this collective. What in your kind of processing, what does it take to move from that individualistic thinking to this collective thinking? Because I feel like there's some of us who are over here on this, you know, we understand collectivism, and there's some of us who are still on this like individualistic, you know, tip. So in your own process, in your own journey, what was it that made you shift from that individualistic thinking to like understanding that that like the work that we must do is actually the work of the collective?
Well, for me, a lot of it has been like looking at previous movements. If you look at the civil rights movement during the 60s or the Vietnam War protests, you don't, I mean, like, yes, there are big names and people who reframe the civil rights movement really want to make it about Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King Jr. But the fact of the matter is that it wasn't like two leaders who fixed the problem, because the problem obviously isn't fixed. It was the hordes and hordes of people who were standing up and saying, this isn't okay. This has never been okay. And we're not going to deal with it anymore. They've been the ones who have consistently been making the changes. That has been what pushes change. It is groups of people so big that nobody can stop them saying, this is not okay. And we're not going to put up with it anymore. And for me, in my personal journey, I had a moment in 2018 where I was like bogged down. I just realized how deep the problems run and how many problems there are. And I like missed a month of school. I was just at home like thinking about like how fundamentally messed up so much of the world is and like how many issues there are. And I was just sitting there in my house like thinking about all of it and strategizing. And I've been strategizing for the past 2 years. And the answer that I've been able to come up with was, there is nothing that I personally can do that is going to change the world. And that's what I've been trying to look for, something that I personally can do. And the answer is, there's nothing, because individuals aren't going to shape the movement. I mean, I could run out and try to shut down an oil rig and then get arrested, and I would get arrested and it would make the news for a couple of weeks and then people would forget, and that's what would happen. So in my mind, it was more like a gradual realization. I always kind of knew that we needed numbers, but I didn't realize like the full scope of all the numbers that we needed until like these past 2 years, the time that I've been thinking about it. Like, when does the change happen? When do people talk about things? It's when there are massive groups of people all stepping up and saying, they can't stop all of us. So.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit? Because I know we have a lot of adults kind of in the audience or whatever, and I finished my anthropology program during the pandemic, and I was so like stressed and depressed and bogged down and in such a deep state of hopelessness around like all of the viral Black death that we saw, the racial uprising, the pandemic, COVID, all of this stuff. And one of the things that changed and helped me to come out of that is I took the only class that I ever took at UW that every time we talked about a problem, the second half of that problem was always sites of resistance. And there's a lot of Indigenous scholarship about this specifically, but the notion that every time there is an injustice, resistance arises, and that there are all of these people who are doing the work in their communities in these really phenomenal ways. And so all of a sudden I'm sitting in the class and I'm learning about like missing and murdered Indigenous women and all of these things in really intimate details. And then I'm learning about grandmothers who are putting up crosses and doing activism in their communities. I'm learning about Indigenous rappers who are rapping in their native Quechua tongue in order to reclaim the language for the younger generation. And like reorienting to know that one, you are never alone in feeling lost. Like Instagram, social media, this inundation of information really creates the conditions for hopelessness for young people, because you just see the world continuing to go on when immense harm is happening. But learning how to teach and facilitate in a way that is whole, like oftentimes we think if we drown kids in the drama of what is happening, it's going to help them to fight and to stand up and to see the problems. And like, that's true, but it's also creating a lot of stagnancy, a lot of hopelessness. Kids are anxious, they're depressed. Like there's all this stuff happening. And so like just the power of presenting a whole story and just really letting kids know that, especially BIPOC queer young people, like our legacy, our ancestral legacy is resistance, is organizing, is people continuing to survive in community and knowing that like we need each other. And so how do we highlight people that are doing the work constantly and doing it in so many different ways that says like, no matter what you have, there's a space for you in the movement, there's space for you in positive change. And this space is a communal space. It's not you carrying the weight on your own. And I think like this one professor, like, I feel like she was changing my life because I was like, oh, you know, I'm taking a class on missing and murdered Indigenous women, human trafficking, migrants dying in the Sonoran Desert. And it's just like back to back to back. I need to hug trees in between classes. And then I was like, oh, wait, because the grandmothers and like all these people are doing things. They're working hard. And like all I have to do is join. And I really appreciated that reframe. And it's something that I try to bring to my work at Why We Like. We're tending to hope and we're stepping into a deep community that really is past, present, and future. And so there's a lot of excitement in that for me.
Asha, anything you want to share of this question?
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I said, could you repeat the question for me one more time?
Yes. So there's
Thank
been a lot of
you.
talk about like this shift from like individualistic thinking to collective thinking. Just sharing your own experience of, you know, if this is the experience you did have about like, oh, this is actually not just about me or one person, but it's actually about collectivism. Just a little bit of reflection around what got you from this to the collective.
Yeah, actually, for me personally, I've always been like a collective thinker. So yeah, I've never really been an individualistic thinker. Because I do think that, like Mary and Athena were saying, like the work is in the numbers. I think when it's a whole bunch of people, a lot of people notice the problem, they want to help, that's when we see change, other than like for the same people trying to like get everyone to hop on or trying to do it themselves. We just don't see consistent change in that. So yeah, for me, I don't have like that much to say because I didn't really go through that shift. I've kind of always been on the collective side. But the power is definitely in the numbers. So I would like to say that. And I really like what you said, Mary, about like people are putting the work in. All you have to do is like join. Like that really stood out to me. I really agree with that point.
Mary, I wanted to follow up because you said two things that I think are really important. Well, everything you said is really important. But this was the power of telling a whole story and hope tending with young people. Because I see this often, and I'm sure Athena and Ash have experienced this with adults, of like people not telling you the whole story of things that are happening in this world, but also how do we keep you from a state of hopelessness like a lot of us sometimes exist in. So Mary, I just want you to talk a little bit more about that, about like the power or just, you know, telling young people the entire story, but also hope tending as you've mentioned.
I guess I'm thinking one aspect is intergenerational relationships and the importance of that. There is something about like youth push forward, young people fall back, that does feel isolating. And the truth is that young people also need context. And a lot of time what the elders have to offer, the memories that they carry, like what they're providing us is context, um, and also like the things they learned on the journey. And so partially that, but also I'm like, it takes intentional effort to reframe our mind in the way that we talk to young people to be positive. The inclination is really like when adults are hopeless and when adults are feeling impacted, like how do you tend to hope within yourself so that you can share that abundance? So I guess that's what's coming up for me, and I'm fully processing. Um, I think of hope tending as also another lens on that is radical imagination. And so like we have a wellness specialist who once said to me, like, one of the greatest tools of the oppressor is its attack on imagination. And I think a lot about how like everything is fake. And it's not fake, but everything is constructed. Like capitalism was constructed. All of these things did not exist, and then they were put together, and we live this truth every single day. We go to work, we pay our taxes, we're doing the thing. We are fully in it. But if it's all something that is constructed, like, can I imagine other ways of being? Can I imagine other constructions? And I think like I keep going back to indigenous scholarship because it's like younger empires have fallen and the United States is relatively young. Like, and so like, how can we encourage you to imagine other ways of being and to step into them and claim them as authentically as we step into and are fully enmeshed into this capitalistic construction and the ways that it permeates our entire being, is something that I've been thinking about a lot in practice. We really have to break this down into smaller chunks. So one of the things that we've been focusing on is like, what is a community of care? And just inviting people into the conversation through like visualizations or different things of like, how do we imagine other ways of being, and how do we invite young people into this relationship of like, you can imagine something else and then we can act on it together and create like hubs and spaces to get really excited and to talk about it and to claim imagination as so integral to change. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question. And then on the other hand, hope tending is really literal. The mental health crisis that was happening over the past year with young people, the level of suicidal ideation, the level of depression, the shifts toward crisis work that happened within our own organization. I think a lot of depression, at least in teenage years, has to do with not being able to see beyond the current moment. And I don't say that, I don't know, I don't want that to sound condescending, but like I was a suicidal teenager and I could not imagine a future for myself, quite literally. Like I did not imagine going to college. I did not, like there are so many things that I just could not see past. Like I was stuck right in that moment and this was it. This was all there was. And so part of imagination is like, can we reclaim positive imagination for young people and help them to see beyond their current circumstances into the life that they could have? And claiming that as a tool to help with like mental health and also with the hopelessness of the moment. But I'm trying to think practical.
Yeah. Practical later. That was great.
Okay.
That I think is so important because I'm Trisha Hersey from the NAP ministry is really big on imagination and the rest that we need in order to cultivate that imagination, that creativity. So I just really want to amplify that piece of how sacred our imagination is and how sacred it is in the minds and bodies of young people, because our future lives in that imagination, and their imagination, our collective imagination. So thank you so much for saying that and sharing that with us. So I have a question for you that hopefully is the practicality piece. You know, as you've been working in this nonprofit and the youth work that you've been doing, what are some ways that organizations need to shift to make space for youth leadership or to do the work of the hope tending? So yeah, if you just want to share some of those things of like practical, like here's what nonprofits and program directors and et cetera need to do in order to better support young people.
Cool. I actually did prep for this. So I have some pretty basic kind of tenets that I wrote down. One being community agreements as an invitation to relationship. I think community agreements is something that we're familiar with, but the guiding questions that we use at YW are to feel supported, I need, ... right? You're inviting young people to say like, this is what I need in this space, and setting the tone that this is a space where you can communicate what you need and be met. Two, I will support others by, right, reciprocity and relationship. We're asking to support you, and we're asking you to support others as well. And then I feel safe to show up as myself. What does that entail? What is it that you need from us? And I find that in doing this in a group setting, youth are able to like hear other people's responses and bounce off each other. Mentors are invited to like model saying things that you need, model saying what helps you feel supported. And usually we're able to generate like a really beautiful container based on the information that young people provide during this process. And then relationship first, I kind of touched on this earlier, but like you need to get to know young people before you start trying to tell them how to live their life. Hopefully in that relationship, you will lose the impulse to tell them how to live their life. Hopefully you will grow some respect as you get to know them and like really be able to honor who they are and where they're at. Honesty, this is two portions to this. One, are we being honest with young people? Are we giving them context? Are we telling them a full story? If we've been really impacted and we're in a hopeless place, can we be honest about that and model that it's okay to show up as we are in space with other people and to be met, that we do not have to put up fronts of perfection. We don't have to pretend to be anything. If I don't know something, can I say I don't know something and say I'll find someone who has that information for you? Like just really basic, like how do we create a culture where we can be honest and show up as who we are, and how do we model that as adults and check all of our perfectionist tendencies? Because young people are experiencing a lot of pressure to be perfect, and so like sometimes it's really radical for them to experience an adult who is showing up authentically. And so that being a practice, but also honesty about boundaries and limitations and your capacity, right? When you're working in a system where burnout is the status quo and the norm, what does it mean to recognize when you do not have capacity to show up for a young person and to find someone who does? Like we say it takes a village, but it really does take a village, and community supports. So at YWE, we hired a wellness specialist who does free therapy for young people and does sessions with them, consults with their families. We're building a healing justice collective that's specifically about funding resources for young people. We build partnerships with other organizations who can handle the crisis care when we can't handle it. But really stepping out of that individual, I have to be everything for this young person, and like my community is well resourced. And when I'm burned out, I can lean on this other person who will show up and meet this need for a young person. And just like, if you don't have it, you don't have it. Somebody else, let them support the young person, like for real, for real. And then I kind of already said it, but I'm like, squad up, build your networks, build your partnerships, build your crisis care supports. If you can hire people to cover an area that's needed, do that. But don't carry it alone. Assume competence. This is something we talk a lot about at YWE, especially working with neurodivergent young people. Assume that they're competent. Don't let someone's like mental diagnosis or orientation have you out here treating them differently or acting like they are not capable of rising to the challenge of relationship. These young people continue to astound and wow us in the ways that they show up. And sometimes all they need is opportunities and for you to really believe in them. And this also looks like compassionate honesty. So I was in a situation at a bike camp, and like the young people did not know that it was a growth camp, so they thought we wanted them to be 100% comfortable all the time. If their seat is hurting their butt, like we're supposed to stop what we're doing and change out their seats. And so we had to like reorient, because I was like, oh, it took us 5 hours to bike 3 miles. Like I was really frustrated. And what I did first is I leaned really hard into compassion, whatever you need, because I didn't want to be honest about my frustration. I didn't want a young person to have to carry the brunt of my frustration. So I leaned really hard in the other direction. But then I realized like, oh, if I had talked to that kid and said, this feels really mental, I feel like you're strong, I feel like you can do it, they would have continued. They would have been able to meet that challenge, but I didn't give the opportunity initially because I was so worried about a kid receiving my frustration or recognizing that I felt upset. And so what does it mean to like compassionately encourage young people and to call them into growth and not always just lead into niceness at cost to like what you're experiencing or these kinds of things, is something that came up for me in that experience. And we got to do this dope exercise where it was like, is it comfort? Is it stretch? Is it panic? You know? And then have kids orient around like where we want them to be for the camp. And that's one of the more like practical exercises for how we set the tone for like, yeah, we're going to be pushing a little bit. We don't want you injured. We don't want you hurt, but we're going to be pushing a bit. And what does it mean to invite young people into that conversation? And then pathways to repair is the other thing. One of the ways to create an environment where young people can be free to make mistakes is for them to know that making a mistake does not mean being removed from belonging in community. And so pathways for repair is something that like we work on a lot in the sense of like, okay, when something happens, when it goes wrong, how do we create structures for young people to show up and to do restorative justice or whatever needs to be done to address a situation, and to know that they will not be removed from community. And sometimes like with ghosting or whatever, kids shut down in the anxiety of like, oh, I really messed up. And it's like, no, this is a community and we support each other and this is how we find our way back. Yeah, I think those are the main things that are coming up for me around youth work. And then on the adult bureaucratic side, if we're really going to support young people in leadership, let's give them a legacy that isn't wrapped around in like a bunch of garbage. So like, these are the hard things too, in the sense that like, is your org paying livable wages when it hires on young people? Like all of these very basic, is it organized? Are there structures for support within your organization? Like how do we welcome people into a working environment that is less toxic than what we entered, with less of the bureaucracy and less of like, the only words that come to mind are expletives. So I'm like, but I'm sure you all know within organizations and within work, like the amount of mess that happens. And so like, how do we create less of that so that our legacy for young people, what they're receiving is less burdened down for that, and it's easier for them to do the work of making change.
Thanks, Mary. I'm seeing a lot of conversation in the chat about wanting to revisit this video. So I'm going to make an assumption that what you are sharing is resonating with folks, or folks are really wanting to learn more about how to do all these things. And what you're referencing, a lot of the things that you said, in my interpretation, is a lot of cultural shifts, a lot of cultural changes. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to actually pass it over to Athena and Ash. If there's anything from your perspective that organizations need to do, or things that you've already encountered that work really well, but just anything that you can think of, like to agencies or organizations to better serve young people. What are things that organizations need to do, or they are doing that have worked for you all?
Well, when I think of an organization, I'm thinking about like resources. I'm thinking about financial backing. I'm thinking about help with help with planning and consistency and reliability. Especially for young people, having resources to do the things that we want to do in the world is really hard because we don't have money. We don't have like a lot of ways of communicating with people aside from social media. And I feel weird about social media activism because it's not always successful, especially when it comes to reaching out to young people. My most successful experiences with an organization helping me to put on a project, I would say, have also been with YWE. And in those events, in those cases, it is usually like help with structure, like help with the steps of putting something on and doing something in your community. And it also means it just resources, like providing people with experience who can help guide finances, locations, that sort of thing.
Athena.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that, so the question is, sorry, I was talking about the question. What do I want to see like organizations that have like worked basically like for you? Yeah. I think like first things first is like creating that space. I think now, especially I've seen like more organizations like, well, not like a lot, but I've seen like the effort to like create space for you to come in and like learn things, whether it's about like food, finances, or like business. I think creating that space for them to come work side by side with adults. And then money opportunities is something that a lot of youth like, whether it's like a large amount or a small amount, just like some type of money opportunity within like whatever the activity is. And there's some other things as well. I think, yeah, just like collaboration, internships, and like workshops are things that I think a lot of organizations should do, that will get you to like join, and that have worked for me personally.
Mary?
I was going to add some tenants. Pay young people for their time. Okay, like period, that part. To always feed them. Like, why we love food. We have a caterer who shows up. Why we kids know that they can eat. They can take food home if they need to. Like, I'm just like, feeding people is the Lord's work always. Do not have young people at a program without food or snacks or something. Invite them into a relationship through food. Compensate them for their time. And then the other thing, back on the organization side, that I wanted to add is the cultural shift that I would like to see as it pertains to grant writing and receiving funding for organizations specifically is, how do we stop lying on paper about the work that we're doing, and how do we be really honest about the processes that we're in and sell that as the place of beauty? So right now we're like in the habit of selling visions. And I really think of this in the cultural context of America, in the sense that, what is it? The land of the free for everybody, or whatever that languaging is the original vision that has never been realized. So this culture of selling a vision and not actualizing values is really, really deep. It's really, really embedded. It's a part of our culture. So what does it mean to be honest about the process that we're in and tell what we're striving for, but also tell what we are, and remove some of the pressure to be lying as an organization? Because there's nothing worse than coming into leadership within an organization and then realizing that they are not actualizing their values. And so, like, I want to hear honest stories. And I think in being honest, there's also a piece around accountability. Like, I'd rather be in an org that knows what they're striving for and can be honest about where they are. I can trust them to be working towards something, as opposed to like coming into an org where they've told me that they're here, but actually none of that is true. And so, like, how do we, something I've been working on within YWE is like, how do we sell the process that we're in? How do we talk about that in a way that is really honest and say that we're still worthy of funding? How do we add a statement to our grants that says, like, we're doing relational individual work that thrives in small numbers. We don't always have to have 1,000 kids. And so, like, calling people into relationships all the time, even when it comes to grants and funders, and shifting the culture and the narrative in that way is something that, like, is a side of struggle, but also feels really, really worthy. And says to people coming in that you can trust us to be about our business and our values. And the last part on that piece, I was thinking of, like, when people get hired for like racial equity and all of that, like, they're like, oh, we have our one person of color who's working on equity and inclusion, but they never ask you about what's the environment that you're working in. People in those positions get so burned out. They're putting up with so much crap. They're like, it's white supremacy and capitalism everywhere. I hate it here. I'm being abused. Because there's a culture of like, let's get the one person to fix it and not think about the environment that we're putting them in. And so with youth work and cultural shifts and like welcoming youth to work, how do we think about the environment that we're inviting youth into and making it less toxic and less in alignment with American dominant values that are not working for BIPOC people because they were not designed to? So that's all on that for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. As a youth say, that was pure fire. Thank you so much. Yes to everything that you said. So for folks who are in the audience, if you have any questions, any lingering questions, please hit the Q&A button, drop them in there, because we are asking one last question before we head to the Q&A at the time. So my last question for you all is it's actually gonna be a freestyle. So Athena, Ash, is there anything that you all want to share with today's audience that you have not been able to share regarding this topic, regarding youth, regarding joy, regarding resources, anything that you all want to share, just kind of last words to us regarding this topic for today?
Sure. I think my big thing is I feel like when youth are involved, people tend to shy away from doing things that are too radical. At least I always felt like that was my experience when I was doing youth work. And of course, it's because you don't want to put your kid in a position where they could go to jail or something, right? But I also feel like that ended up like with us doing things that were like very by the book. Like I would find us sitting down and doing a planning meeting for a rally, and then like paying money to the city to host a protest like at city council. So we're trying to protest the government while paying the government to do it. And to me it sort of felt like we were putting on a show. That was how it always felt. Like it was some kind of performance. You know, we were doing something to feel good about ourselves and then go home. So I guess my big feedback is like, don't do like activism disingenuously. Like don't talk to kids like we can't see what's going on, or the hypocrisy in our own work. And if we try to raise concerns, which I did a lot, I was always like, I feel like this isn't working, I feel like this isn't helpful. I would often be told, well, change is happening, it's just not happening at a rate that you can see, you know. And I could see that wasn't true. So just like hold us on the same level and treat us not like you would treat another adult, because I feel like that is also a way in which a lot of the problems came in, because we're not adults. But don't lie, be honest, and like don't try to put us into more symbolic works of resistance as opposed to real acts of resistance. You know, like acknowledge our agency and let us make the sacrifices we're wanting to make while also guiding.
Thanks, Athena. Ash?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Athena, for that too. For me, I would just say like creating spaces that you know is needed, like in your community. I think that's something that is just needed for a lot of youth today, especially like in the Seattle, Washington area, like for like the Latinx community, Black community, Asian community, like create spaces for the communities that just, and for youth that need it the most, like for sure. Especially like with nature, I think nature's dope. I'm just kind of like saying things that I like, but like nature, like resources, and just create this space. Just create this.
Thanks. Mary, do you want to add anything to this one?
And listening to Athena, I think the question that came up for me is, what if we asked youth what role they wanted to play in making change? So.
Thank you. Thank you. 2, 3. We're gonna go over to the question tab. We have a couple questions here. See how many we can get through. I know that this was talked about in our pre-check-in meeting, and Mary, I believe you also brought this up. But Carol asks, I'd be interested in hearing impressions of intergenerational dialogue and what works for youth in that regard. So intergenerational dialogue and what works in that regard. So conversations with folks who are of varying ages, and how does that work? What have you seen work? What have you seen not work?
Like, is this directed at me or are we?
We can go with you, Mary.
Oh, I think setting the tone is something that we do at YWE, and doubling back to that sense of like community agreements. I think I'm like 27, but I was raised, by some good Black people, and I was taught to bow down to my elders in a particular way. Um, that, that old school respect kind of way. And so I think like no matter who we're dealing with, we set the tone for our mentors in these intergenerational relationships, that we are listening to young people first and that we're building relationships. And it's also an opportunity for them to say what they need from us to feel respected. Like building community agreements sets the tone for how do I need to feel supported? How do I need to be respected in this environment? And then allowing young people to meet them there. And I think that that's one of the things that like, I don't know, I just feel like we know what it is, a lot of older people. I don't know, it's just different generational socialization. And so I think one of the ways that we take that on and create more safety for young people and also respect for elders is allowing them to state what their needs are and then setting the tone and being the barrier person to be like, this is how we do things that way. This is what we need. This is how we encourage you, and wanting to really straddle the respect on both ends. We also have conversations and dialogues with young people where we invite them into the conversation about like, what does it mean to respect your elders? What kind of relationships do you have with your grandparents? Like, where we can really get into the nitty gritty and like, how do you straddle respect and still show up as yourself? And with the older generation, how do we invite them to the relationship in a way where they feel respected? But we're also where we're saying like, and this is how we do things, and like we are shifting a little bit because we want young people to feel comfortable showing up fully. That's not really an example of dialogue, but I'm thinking of like real old school seen and not heard, or like all these things that come up, and we get some vibey people who have that attitude every now and then, and we just get real open and talk about it, and it usually works out fine.
Thanks, Mary. So I want to rephrase this question for Athena and Ash. So when you're in conversation with adults or elders or people who are older than you, like what are some things that are helpful when talking to them or being in conversation with them? Or what are some things that you're just like, yo, sometimes I don't like talking to adults because this, and this happens. So I'll turn it back to you.
I think for me, for the most part, I'm like pretty comfortable with talking to adults. I think sometimes like in some professional settings, they might not like take you seriously as they would like someone that's like older than you, regardless of like me being 18 or whatever. But I think for the most part, I'm pretty comfortable. I think sometimes like I have to remember like I can't talk to them like I would someone my age. So I try to like not say certain words like, well, this isn't really anyone's problem but mine, but like, I don't know, I try to like be more, not professional, what's the correct term? Like proper. But like with YWE, I learned that like I don't have to, like I can still show up as like my authentic self and talk like in the ways that I talk with like some of my friends or like my family, and it's fine and it's respected, and it's not like, oh, like why are you talking to me like that, or like that's inappropriate. So I think just like accepting youth for like who they are and just how they talk, because that ranges from like where they're from, your ethnicity, and just accepting all of that really helps me like be comfortable with being myself around adults.
Thank you. Athena, anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, for me, the most valuable interactions I've had with adults as mentors have been the ones that are, I mean, I said it before, but people being honest with me. Like in general, I don't care if you're treating me like a kid or like an adult, but I need honesty, and I don't like it when people sugarcoat. I really hate being told that I'm inspiring. I think that it's a bit of a pet peeve now because I've given so many speeches and then people decide to make it about me instead of what I'm saying. But I think also it's just a matter of like not being treated like a person, like I'm being treated like an idol or something like that. And that really bothers me, and it makes it hard on me. Sorry, I just accidentally pulled out my headphone jack and it completely like derailed my train of thought. I would also say that like some interactions that have left me feeling really frustrated have just been like people completely dismissing what I've been saying. Oftentimes these have been in more adversarial situations. Like I've had meetings with people who were not on my side, and we were trying to have a conversation about it. And that I often felt like I was being patronized or treated like I don't have an understanding of the problem, told to do other kinds of work instead of the work that I was trying to do because they felt it would be a better use of my time. So don't patronize me, be honest with me. I don't mind if you're completely frank with me about the level of experience I have or how naive or stupid something I'm saying sounds, but I appreciate honesty and straightforwardness, and I don't think there's any youth out there who would be like, no, lie.
Thanks, Athena. Let's go to the second question, probably the last one before we end at 12:30. So Catherine Brown, much appreciation for all that's been shared. Wondering if panelists have seen or experienced strong youth leadership with adult collaboration in school settings, and whether they have or not, and what conditions they believe educators must create for that to flourish.
Well, one example does come to mind for me. I don't remember what exactly he did, but there was this like 5-year-old in a group that I was in who like started a campaign at his elementary school to get like less sugar in the school lunch or something like that, like healthier food. But I don't remember the specifics of it because I just remember going, really? At 5? And then um in the school setting it's kind of harder, right? Because teachers have specific rules they need to follow and all of that. And there's like formality between teachers and students that is kind of different from how like the relationship is between a child and a mentor. Um, but for me, I would say the best example of leadership and guidance I had from a teacher in middle school was this teacher named Miss Paris. I put on a production of Hamilton as a fundraiser for the hurricane in Puerto Rico in like 2018, Hurricane Maria. And what Miss Paris basically did was she opened space for us to come and make planning ourselves. She gave us guidance and sometimes set boundaries and rules of what we should do. Like she actually vetoed us from removing all the curse words from Hamilton. She was like, no, say the curse words. But she also provided funding and space and transportation and whatever things that were obstacles for us in terms of what we were doing. So, and she was very real with us, she kept it real. And I appreciated that from her. So I guess like being a mentor, letting the students like kind of do what they're gonna do, but also like being there as like a baseline, somebody everyone can rely on and fall back on.
Thanks, Athena.
For me personally, yeah, this question, I seen it early and I was thinking about it. And honestly, like with like the schools I've been to, I think one of the schools, and this was during my 9th grade year, it was actually a charter school. Some of you guys may know it's called Rainier Valley Leadership Academy, but their vision was that for the incoming 9th grade class that we could like basically create our year so we could make our classes, and we had a leadership class that we could like be leaders in by like having events and like making like I think it was like a high school homecoming for ourselves, which never happened because they lied about it. But that's kind of like something I experienced. Like, I think with this question, I haven't really experienced like a strong youth leadership in a school setting. For me, like with my leadership positions, I've kind of went outside of my school to find that. I've never really felt that comfortable in my school setting, or even like pushed in my school setting to like be like a strong youth leader within schools. So this question, I kind of have like a hard time answering it. But kind of like what Athena and Mary were saying previously for previous questions, I think being honest is like one of the best things that can be done. So at least like someone can know what they need to do, and like you can know what they need to do with the situation they're in. So like for education, for educators, I think like being honest with what we can do with like the school that we're in, and yeah, I just think being honest, I don't really have that much to say about that one.
Well, we are at time, y'all. We are at 1:30. I just really want to thank Mary, Athena, and Ash for your time, for your wisdom, your expertise, just everything that you all shared with us this afternoon. It is much, much appreciated. For everybody who's still online, as a reminder, you will see the recording on the Communities of Opportunity page. We also ask that you please fill out the survey to provide feedback on this event. And we will see you all in September for Grounded in Abundance, talking about budgets and how we can reimagine the way in which we do budgeting for organizations and what does that look like. But again, thank you so much to Mary, Athena, and Ash for everything, for accepting this invitation, for the labor of the pre-event check-in, and also for being here and sharing what you all shared with us. I know that I have a lot that I'm going to be thinking about and reflecting on as things that you've shared, and grow and change and evolve as an adult that also serves young people. I'm sure that everybody else who was able to witness today is feeling very similar feelings. So thank you all so much. Again, see you all September for our 4th speaker series event. In the meantime, y'all stay blessed and stay fly, and we'll be seeing you. Take care, everyone.